How has this response been so far? Like, there's a lot of different ways you can go about launching a podcast. I'm just kind of curious, like, what you've seen so far.
Yeah, and now you wanna share some of your thoughts?
I mean, I didn't really know what to expect, but it's kind of exceeded all expectations. We we've done both the like big, the LinkedIn, Twitter launch, but then also the guerrilla marketing, and all of our nerd friends, and
I love it.
I'm shocked at how many people have made it through a meaningful portion of it in a short amount of time.
Yeah, it's definitely a feat to listen to a long episode. I for one am the kind of person who I despise like reading things. I only listen to things, and I have like 50 episodes queued. But I put you guys on the top because I had heard about this. I think I was also the first one to leave you a review on the Apple app, so you're welcome for that.
Thank you.
Anyways, I'm super hyped. So I think we've got enough people here. We will share this as well um, later on the recording, so other people who can't join now can check it out. But we'll just get into it. So I guess as a preamble, I guess, I really did love this first episode. I think it's genuinely going to be a good project, right? I'm not just saying that because I want to give you guys flowers, but I really think that this format is something that we've been missing in kind of the energy climate nerd space, if you will. So I'm all here for it. But for those people who are not familiar with who you guys are, maybe just give like a 1 minute rundown of what you guys are doing in your day jobs.
Yeah, our day jobs is we're climate tech investors. I've been on Clean Techies, that you can link out to whenever that
Shout
was,
out.
where we talked where we talked about the fund. The fund is called Stepchange Ventures, and it is the two of us, and we are taking our decades of working in software product fintech spaces and applying it towards the climate crisis and finding the most impactful companies to help at the earliest stage, pre-seed and seed investing. So that's where we spend, 90% of our time.
Yeah. And I guess what tell us slightly more about the well, I guess before I would go to that, I will say the episode that you did was 158 for anybody who's curious if they want to go back and look. But tell us a little bit about the podcast itself. Like why decide to do this format and why decide to put in all this effort to make a very long, in-depth podcast?
Yeah, it's a good question. Prior to this, for some context, I've had a fun project called Climate Papa. That's mostly an interview format show where I interview other founders and investors and artists and just kind of my broad explorations in the climate world. And I had a fun conversation on that. And so that satisfies the like interview kind of itch. But I've had a long-standing obsession with the Acquired podcast. For those that don't listen to it, recommend it. They do about an episode a month, maybe every month and a half, on some deep story of a business. They've done Standard Oil, which might be relevant to this audience, but they've also done Costco and IKEA and Berkshire Hathaway and Nintendo, and Taylor Swift and LVMH. And these stories are just compelling stories. They're often driven by the founders and the business journey. But also, I think one reason they're compelling is you do walk away with some deep lessons about the product, about the founder, about the business. And while I'm consuming that, I'm simultaneously ramping up in climate and energy and thinking about infrastructure. And I spend all of our days talking about all these problems and just realizing that the historical context is often missing in kind of our sphere. And so we wanted to dive deep into that context. And I think, you know, I guess there's a few orders of interest for us. The first is just like selfishly, it's intellectually stimulating and motivating, and we want to understand the world. But then I think more practically, if you're trying to upgrade, how we heat our homes today, right? Everyone's excited about heat pumps. We're very excited about heat pumps. We want to transition people from a gas furnace to a heat pump. But without knowing that, like, that is the seventh fuels transition we've done for how we heat our homes. Like, we should go back in history a little bit and understand, how do we move from wood to coal, and how do we move from coal to gas, and like what actually happened in society, and why did that happen, and like how could that not enrich our ability to be good investors, but also just like good thinkers in the ecosystem? So that's kind of the eternal motivation, that I've had with it. And
Yeah, and I think that, I mean the topics that we're interested in, coal being the first one. There's a few different ways to consume it, but this format, I think stemming from Ben's experience with Climate Papa, like the podcast is something that I think moves through his veins, and was not a high lift for him to think, hey, I can turn this into a podcast. But the conversational audiobook format that Acquired has done so well, it as we listen to those shows and other long form, it's such an intuitive way to understand a topic through storytelling. And history is nothing if not like wonderful stories, tragic stories, complicated stories. And so it almost seemed like a natural kind of combination of a complex topic that spans a large period of time, and the conversational audiobook that we've come to appreciate as a new medium of learning.
Yeah, no, I definitely I resonate with that a lot. I've always envied the people who are willing to have the focus to put in the research to make these kind of things because my ADHD makes it really difficult to stay on a project that long. But no, I admire that a lot, and I admire the acquired folks as well. So it makes sense, you know, guys. You guys also being investors that you'd want to do this because you already have to do a lot of deep dive research anyway. So you might as well understand it well and share it with other people so that they can get some value out of it too. Um, what do you guys, I guess, hope to accomplish with this project in the long term? Is there any particular grand vision you have for it?
I want more people to work on infrastructure. I think that's like I think I get hope about the future of, our species and our lives when smart, motivated people are putting energy towards things that, I think tip the right direction. And I think without knowing that these are interesting things to work on and spaces that can and will evolve, infrastructure feels invisible by default. That's like a success steady
Mm,
state for infrastructure, right? You don't think when you flip a light switch on or plug in your phone the magic of what happened to get the electrons to flow to charge your phone, and the battery inside and the microprocessor inside and the magic of this phone call right now. And I think that's great. Like that's again, that's infrastructure working for a consumer. But if we want things to be better, if we want the power to be more reliable and more evenly distributed globally and more, accessible and more affordable, then we have to go figure out how these things work and understand them and know that humans before us built these systems, and humans ahead of us are going to evolve them. And so I want more people to work on these problems.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and I think the like precursor to bringing talent to this space would be kind of having more people appreciate how the modern world came to be, right? What are some of the fundamental systems and 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 infrastructure and buildings that created the world that we live in today? And with that appreciation, we can appreciate the complexity, and then we can appreciate and understand how we can move to the next stage of evolution. But
mhm.
it's hard to envision a future if you don't really have the appreciation for where we've come from.
Yeah, I will say that that was probably the biggest takeaway I had from listening to the first episode was just like getting a maybe like a really I what I felt was a really good understanding of what it might be to watch to look back at the time that we're going through now and seeing like how will it be to transition to this new type of technologies. And I was like, that is something that nobody has ever been able to contextualize for me as well as you guys did with this Cole episode. So props to you for that. That's definitely an undertaking, right? I guess before speaking of this episode with Cole, like, could you give us just for people who haven't already heard it, like a slight sneak peek about the show and why they should consider listening?
Oh yeah, a little teaser trailer. Will we start the story hundreds of millions of years ago with plants that were stored carbon, and over millions of years turned into rocks, and then fast forward into kind of mid millennia, 16, 1700s Britain, and how this energy source and the demand for more of this led to innovation that unlocked the industrial revolution and transformed economies, ultimately transformed the world. So from the steam engine to railroads to industrial manufacturing to how cities were built, and then the story of the people behind that and the labor and the environmental degradation. It's Coal is kind of this amazing story of how the industrial world was built, and the pursuit of coal that drove it.
Yeah, I think that's a good. That's a. I feel like that's a really good teaser. So I highly recommend people checking it out. It's gonna blow your mind, especially if you like to nerd out about how things work, right? I can't say it's for everybody, but I guess maybe on that topic,
No, it's not.
who are the people you think should listen to this? Like, what's the persona look like in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think I spoke to like, there's our goal with it, which is to motivate people to work on infrastructure. So anyone I think who's kind of inclined to learn about this stuff out of interest. But I do think these stories are more broadly interesting than that, right? I am fascinated by learning about, the history of Hermes, and I have no interest in becoming someone in that industry. Um, and so I think it's really if you are interested in the world, like if enough. And like on one hand, people are like, 3 hours, that's insane. Like who's going to listen to 3 hours about coal? It's like, yeah. I mean, on the other hand, like, do you want to know why we're speaking English in this country? Because the British Empire was successful, and like this stuff is pretty interesting. And once you start to get into the stories and you understand, like, why we cook the way we do, and how the trains came to be, and like this the whole story of the world, right? And so I think that if if it's viewed as, hey, a 3 hour podcast about a topic, like that might be a turnoff. If you view it as, an I framed at the top as like, this is in a different way of consuming a book, a level of material in a different format, I think it's actually maybe overly condensed, right? Like we're covering, millennia, and trying to unpack, you know, the elements we can about the science and the human stories. And so there's just a lot to cover. Um, and if that, I think one thing with this project that I've had to accept is that it will not be for everyone, and that's okay. Like, and that's totally fine if you're not
Mhm,
someone who's compelled by, and the different topics down the line. Maybe you're not interested in coal, but you're interested in something we do downstream. Like that's great. Um, but in a way, the flip side of that is that the people it's for, I think it's really for, right? Like that's usually the flip side of something not being for everyone, is like the niche it's for really, it really speaks to them. And so I think that's been one of the coolest things about the last 24 hours, is just some of the climate founders, some of the people in the energy space have reached out and been like, I needed this. This is
mhm.
motivating. This is like, exhilarating. So it's for those people.
Yeah, as you're talking, I was thinking about like, are you the type of person that has an ever-growing queue of podcasts you want to listen to and books you want to read and tabs of articles you've opened up? You are curious about so much around you and you're triaging. Well, our hope is that we're taking a really interesting, dense, complex topic and saving you the 15-hour book and turning it into 2 to 3 hour podcasts. And so it is an investment, but on one hand, but on the other hand, it's like a total time saver if we
Mhm.
do our jobs well.
No, it's a great way to frame it, and I think you've been spying on me with all my books piling up in my queue of podcasts. No, that definitely describes me. So I understand why I fit into this category. Um, I am curious, how do you guys, I guess, decide in terms of the future, like since you have to do so much research, how do you decide what other topics to cover in the future?
We'll see. That's the fun thing about being episode one. We're working on part two of Cole, and there's a rich story in the next 120 years since we ended the first episode around the year 1900, and so there's a whole evolution to get through around coal moving from this front and center fuel into the electricity story and the rise of China and India and all these other things. So I think our mind space is there.
I'll tell you
Following
a
that,
quick story. So I think the answer might be obsession because the way Cole came about was Ben just kept talking about it, and I was like, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, okay. And then I was literally in the NICU for 4 days with our newborn baby, and like had a lot of time on my hands as we're like up through the night. And Ben was like, just read this book. And so I did. I listened to one of our primary sources on the history of coal as an audiobook in the NICU, and then the light bulb went off for me. And in that sense, how coal came about was we followed a gut obsession.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think that will lead to the next one, right? So after we're done with our coal
No more babies though.
obsession, yeah,
but you'll
yeah,
you'll so you'll just keep pulling on the threads then. That makes a lot of sense. I think it's also a good way to go, and you'll probably get a few suggestions from folks. And I'm sure as you wrap up the coal part two, you'll have some ideas of what the next technology is. But speaking of this research, I am really curious when you do a show like this, like how much time did you actually have to put into researching and how many books you read, et cetera? Like, what does it look like and what you did to be able to achieve the outcome, including the time to record and editing and everything?
It's a lot. I think the ratio is probably about, you know, it's probably 100 to 150 hours of research to get to the 3-hour episode. Um, and then, yeah, there's recording. For that 3-hour episode, we probably record about 7 hours of content that we're working through, and post production and kind of getting it all ready. I think the first episode is more work than future ones, hopefully, in that perspective. But I think the research is the thing that I don't see going down. If anything, I think there's a more likely scenario in some cases it goes up, where we're like, just need to dig deeper on things that are less accessible. And that's where, to a nice point about the obsession, like, we're not going to go do 100 hours of research to produce an episode for something we're not interested in. It just, like,
Mhm.
it doesn't work. Right? You can't, like, we don't have to do that. We can just choose something we're much more interested in. um, in this case, we did have a really good source book that I mentioned, that we called out at the beginning of the episode, and we had a conversation actually with the author of that book, which was fantastically helpful. Um, but then there are probably 4 or 5 other books that we read that kind of complemented it. I like some of Vaclav Smil's writing to kind of create general context. And then the world of online material. So, like, Our World in Data, to call out, like, has amazing. It's going to power a lot of the story for the next 120 years in terms of just like the uses of fossil fuels across countries and history. And then a lot of Wikipedia and a lot of other podcasts and try. I mean, we try to just consume, like, just going through all the tentacles of YouTube and podcasts to feel like what really has been the stories that other people have bubbled up here. And surprisingly, actually, maybe this speaks to the need. There's not that much. Like, given the role that Cole has played, that I framed very well in his teaser, in designing, essentially modern civilization and the, empires that were powerful and the cities that were powerful, there's shockingly little out there that kind of tells that story. So,
I think
we found what we
that's an
could.
excellent framing on the research. Ben's wife Anna is on here. She's probably the true source of how, like, I would just get text messages while I'm trying to sleep, and Ben's like, I I like edited this again and I edited this again. And it's like the podcast production aspect of it. He took on all of that, and I don't know where he found the time, but I think it was a sleep sacrifice.
That's, yeah. Other side of obsession, which is like,
Yeah,
I wanted it to. If you're going to spend 3 hours listening, I want it to not suck. And the
exactly.
bar, unfortunately, the other thing that the acquired guys have done after listening to a bunch is they've set a bar for what not sucking looks like, and that's they've been on it for 10 years of chipping away to
Yeah.
create a consistent great product. And so, yeah, that's a
Yeah, I
big
was
part.
gonna comment on that because I said to myself as I was listening, I was like, man, this is like, yeah, this is our first one doing this, but like, I guarantee you this is way better than Acquired's first episode, which I have not listened to, so I can go check and confirm that, but I'm very sure that's the case. So you guys are really up there. But I guess maybe last thing would just be, I am curious if having done this and having been able to go really, really deep, has this changed your kind of thought process or I guess investing um process in general, or is it relatively like, you guys look at things still the same way?
I think there's a point that I synthesize. So, the format of the episode is like 80% the history, and then around 20% at the tail end, we kind of analyze what our bubble up points are. And there's a crystallization there in particular around just the market forces driving so much of the fuel consumption in the switch from wood to coal that is not a new observation. It's like, of course, market forces drive fuel consumption. But when you look at something like what drives EV adoption in the macro sense, for example, it's not it's one of those, like, it's the economy, stupid. It's like it comes down to the daily expenses in people's lives in a really important way, and seeing how strongly coal did that, despite it being a really hard thing to use in the home and really smelly and really policies regulating against it. just showed how much the market force really is there for a fuel. So that like that really stuck with me. Honestly, even not just in doing the research, but actually required doing the episode to just like really crystallize uh, that insight for me.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, we're right now in like the first week of a new administration in this country, right? And I think just having gone deep into history and seeing how powerful market forces are, just gives me confidence that like you'll have left turns, right turns, policy changes, but the train has left the station on if people want cheaper, better, faster products, the market is going to respond, and if something's better or more useful, then the market will adhere, and we saw that with the demand of coal, and I think we'll see that with something like EVs. They're just a superior transportation
Mhm.
method.
Yeah, I was gonna say bring this up actually. This is like my biggest recognition was this fact that it doesn't matter because the technology itself, if it's just good, it will just pull people along. Like I won't spoil it, but you gave so many examples of there being like barriers for people adopting it, but they still chose to anyways, right? So I again, we'll wrap it up here. I'll just tell people cannot recommend enough to go check out the show, Stepchange, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow on Substack, give it some 5 stars once you give it a listen. I guarantee you it's worth it. And I'm looking forward to the next episode coming out, guys. No pressure, but you've got an avid fan here counting down the days, right?
Thanks, Silas. Great,
All right,
good
take
chatting with
care.
you. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye
Appreciate
bye.
it.